This week's episode of the Cloudcast is brought to you by Intel Cloud for All, driving the creation of thousands of clouds.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to another episode of the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from DockerCon here in Barcelona, and first of all, huge thanks to the Docker folks for having us as a media sponsor. Today, we're talking to Nick Steinmates, VP of Biz Dev and Tech Alliances at Docker. How you doing, Nick?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Good. So, first of all, wanted to start with your background, because you've got this super interesting background in the fact that, yeah, I just said you run Biz Dev and Tech Alliances, but you don't have a background in that. Like you come from the techie world and then went to the dark side, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, in very recent history, I was actually a user of Docker before I joined Docker, and I joined Docker 2.5 years ago. So, user early on. Before I joined the company, I was responsible for a software product lifecycle from ideation to delivery to our professional services team and professional services out to the biggest banks in the world. And so not only did I manage that process, I managed all of the underlying infrastructure to make delivery possible. That's build machines, that's source code management. And then I had to go out to these banks and communicate to them, our process was solid, secure. It wouldn't introduce any viruses, all of those compliance concerns that they have. So I found Docker. It was obviously a way to streamline that process for all the way from ideation to delivery, and I became an evangelist. I started writing about it. I started talking about it, and I really just continued in that role of evangelizing Docker to a different audience, to the tech providers out there. Right,
and I saw it on Twitter earlier today. It was like, you were the first person to ever use Docker. As Docker.
Yeah. So one of the first things I worked on in my spare time was, converting my then blog to Docker, right?
Sure.
And my first post on that blog was, the process of installing Docker and getting it right on Linode, which is a cheap VPS host, right?
Yep.
And I started contributing to docs that way. Mm-hmm. And so, my blog in the beginning was a endeavor of how to actually use Docker, how to take this idea and actually make it work.
Yep. That's fascinating. So, probably the biggest thing we need to dive into here is, so when you say Biz Dev and Tech Alliances, everyone immediately thinks ecosystem. Ecosystem leads to probably the biggest thing we come across is a little bit of confusion, maybe overstating it, but certainly maybe a slight lack of clarity into there's all these Docker products, and it seems like every DockerCon there's more products and there's more projects, and how to put all the pieces together, whether it's within Docker or whether it's within the rest of the ecosystem. And so as somebody who lives and breathes that every single day, how do you see all of the both internal Docker stuff and external Docker stuff, and it all fitting together from an architecture standpoint?
Yeah, great question. I think there's two ways to answer it, so I'm going to answer the easy ways first and then the hard way second.
Fair enough.
So the easy way to answer it is, we have what's amazed me is the vibrant community that's surrounded Docker, not only from the amazing contributors that we have to the project, but also to all of the technology companies that have started because Docker exists or that have embraced Docker as a part of an overall product offering. Today we track over 400 companies, half of which probably didn't exist 2 years ago, which has been truly phenomenal, right? So, we owe a lot to that community, and so I have to be very mindful of how that community is interacting and integrating with Docker. I think very early on, we've talked about this vision of unlocking developers and providing portability between platforms. And this idea that, the future of infrastructure is to compete for workloads instead of to lock workloads into that infrastructure. And so, the message from day one has been about developer portability, developer productivity, and our product offering and product focus has been centered around how do we unlock the developer, how do we unlock that creativity that exists. And so, there's a meme now, the the batteries included but swappable, right?
Yes.
That's something we take to heart. We need to have an end-to-end solution that works out of box,
right.
but also, again, understand that there's a tremendous amount of technology out there. And customers ultimately want that choice. They used to go to a vendor and say, I want this thing for my developers to deploy to, and we need a support contract associated with that. We'll buy everything from you.
Right. But
more and more these days,
someone stack, someone best of breed, someone other things, just for various different reasons. Right?
Exactly. But what anyone who's lived in that world understands is basically you get average software. You don't really get to see the full value of everything that shines through, right? You kind of go to not a lowest common denominator, maybe that's too harsh, but somewhere just a bit above that, right?
Sure.
And our goal really is to unlock really that true value and not make it about how do you get your workload there or how developers program to that, but really what is the value that technology, that infrastructure brings to bear, and how do you best utilize it?
Sure. Yep. And that being said, so what's probably the single biggest challenge you face in your day-to-day in the ecosystems right now?
Well, I think there's a clear question from us, from the ecosystem to us. What are the areas where we can innovate, and how can we do business with Docker? Mm-hmm. And so one of the problems that we're figuring out right now is how to highlight those various areas of innovation. Early on this year, we kicked off a process called the Ecosystem Technology Partner Program. Mm-hmm. We highlighted the monitoring segment. We'll be highlighting the logging segment in the upcoming weeks.
Cool.
You can expect that to roll out. That's a base level opportunity to co-market with us. I think co-marketing is great. The dollars have to flow in at some point, and so you can imagine built on top of that additional programs that would allow certification or specialization inside of those different categories.
That makes sense. So I'm going to ask you the one that we had talked about before we hit record. So we had a running joke on the podcast last year around keynotes, and not DockerCon keynotes, but every other keynote in the industry.
Yeah.
And you know where I'm going with this. I think Ben might have been on stage at every single vendor keynote practically last year that was. And so first of all, are you the guy directly responsible for that? I want to know, is Ben does he like you or does he hate you because of that?
Well, I would say the technology is solely responsible for that, but Ben and I definitely had a part in that. And, it goes back to the founding strategy that we had for Docker, which was delight developers. Developers will start using it and bringing you into the enterprise. And, we thought we'd have 3 years to do that, but it happened in 6 months. And so a big part of that was making Docker, the open source project, ubiquitous, not only in contribution, but as well from technology integration. And so, a big focus was making sure that those big companies that were holding their vendor conferences knew that Docker was out there and validated in a certain way.
Yeah.
So,
And so then I have to say, well, then thank you, because you had a hand in developing the industry's best drinking game last year, because it was absolutely, if anybody said Docker in a keynote, it was drink, and if Ben showed up on stage, it was finish your beer. So on behalf of the entire community and industry, we have to say thank you.
All right. Well, there's a joke in there about hangovers the next day, but we'll just leave it there.
All right, and with that, we're out of time for this week. Nick, where can everyone find out more about you and Docker and everything else that's going on right now?
So I try to tweet at Nick Steinmates, and to find out a lot about Docker, go to the Docker blog, blog.docker.com.
Awesome. All right, Nick, thank you very much for your time, and everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.